Jacqui painter. I do a few different things. I am an elected district leader for Assembly District 51 in Brooklyn, New York. And I also work part-time as artistic director for the nonprofit, the Red Hook Art Project. The Red Hook Art Project is a nonprofit that works with youth in the neighborhood of Red Hook, mostly from public housing who live in the Red Hook houses, and provides free arts programming and wellness programming to youth after school. Growing up in New York City, there wasn't a lot of nature. Some of my best memories were as a teenager, like going all the way to Central Park and hanging out under the trees with my friends, going to Prospect Park in Brooklyn, and just being able to have peace and a different surrounding. People from an urban perspective where we don't really get to see it every day. When we see nature, it's a special experience, and being interested in the environment and nature really connected me to climate change issues and trying to protect it. Red Hook, Brooklyn is a very close-knit community of neighbors who are very passionate about where we live and protecting our environment and our community. You know, we were very, very impacted by Hurricane Sandy, which was a natural disaster about 12 years ago now that devastated our neighborhood and a lot of other neighborhoods on the East Coast. It's really important to try to mitigate that as much as possible by protecting the waterfront, introducing more natural environments along the waterfront, having more bike paths along the river. I know that, you know, in the country, a big push for bike paths and bikeable communities along waterfront communities, because it is better also for the dangers of rising sea levels to not have cars right there next to the water. And that's something that we are working on in Brooklyn, called the Greenway, to get Brooklyn to be totally bikeable along the waterfront. It's taken about 5 to 10 years, and it still is not complete because of the lack of funding. So I also, in all of my roles, really try to advocate our politicians and our government to put more funding and more resources into these endeavors. There's only so much that one individual can do. It would be a lot more of a lasting impact if we had legislation and true change to be able to enact sustainable energies and sustainable infrastructure around our country. So New York City implemented the Climate Mobilization Act, and in the Climate Mobilization Act is something called Local Law 97, which is very interesting because it's really reducing the amount of carbon emissions from buildings. 70% of harmful carbon emissions come from buildings and building infrastructure. Local Law 97 goes actually into buildings and makes sure that they are retrofitted with more carbon neutral technologies. Of course not, like, we can't just go from 100% to 0%, but it is something that our city is doing and trying to implement. We had a few hiccups with it because it was supposed to be implemented right before COVID happened in 2020, and I think that we're seeing that effect throughout the country with delays in legislation, which is unfortunate because, you know, climate change can't wait. In frontline communities like Red Hook, we are really looking to implement flood mitigation and climate change disaster mitigation technologies. Red Hook, for example, is an urban heat island, and what that means is that it's mostly concrete and there's no shade, there's no natural greenery to provide any natural breezes or natural respites from the sun and the built environment. So what we're trying to do is we are trying to mitigate the urban heat island effect with different gardens and with different greenery areas to obviously protect humans, animals, and if we were to have another climate disaster, it would help mitigate that as well. If we all come together to try to solve the bigger picture, that's really what we're going to need in the end, is we're going to need legislation and funding for all these projects. These projects and transferring to, you know, renewable energies are going to take time and money and a lot of our energy to be able to enact it on such a large scale. Everyone should write their legislators. It's really easy, you just go online, you can write them, you can call them, and even if you don't exactly know what you're fighting for, it's always good to just make an issue known. If there's an issue that's important to you about the environment or about climate change that is specific to your area or just as a whole for the planet, just call your legislator and let them know that. It's always good to give them more information than they need, because then that gives them evidence as to what to fight for when they're being paid to fight for us. If we don't push them as hard as we can, then they're not going to fight as hard as they can for our issues.
Exactly.